Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/ytaxp and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show reminding you that it's 7 p.m. Do you know where your children are? I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight is a child, a mother, a sinner, and a nonprofit. Welcome, Laura Magee.
Hello, thank you.
And we're joined tonight by an unholy mom who wears many hats, including ambassador, virtual support group leader, and agent supporter for Recovering from Religion. Welcome, Helen Greene.
Hello, thank you for having me back, Christy.
Okay, so tonight we are going to be talking about secular parenting. What does that have to do with sexuality other than the fact that sex is usually how we make kids? Well, sex education is important and is often neglected as a part of parenting, and we are going to talk about it. So we will also be discussing other topics like sex positivity and teaching children beyond the cis-het model. So give us a call with your stories and questions at 512-991-9242 or call us at tiny.cc/callsex. The show is coming right now.
All right, that sound means that we are starting this week like we do every week with What's Turning You On This Week. Laura, I'm super excited to have you here. I'm really glad that we're getting to do a show together. Tell me what's been turning you on this week?
Oh, other than being here tonight, which I'm super excited about, what's really turning me on this week is the podcast that I listen to called Shameless Sex. So these lovely women, Amy and April, are super, super sex positive, and they talk about all kinds of different topics, from like just vibrators and toys to kinks, oral sex, anal sex. Like they just uncover all of it. But they also talk about serious stuff like sex work and breakups and like how to be a better lover. So they really like cover the gambit of sexual topics and make everything demystified and normalized, and it's awesome.
All right. Well, sounds like I just got a second favorite sex podcast. I'll definitely have to take a look.
Second favorite, yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Helen, what's been turning you on this week?
So that is the second person that's recommended Shameless Sex to me this week. So that's definitely something I'm going to have to check out. So what's turning me on this week is creating like a sexy space for all your intimate goings on besides sleeping in your bedroom. Because like I know for me, we've been purging a lot of the stuff in our bedroom, and I got rid of a bunch of old sex toys.
Oh no!
Because when you have some sex toys and they get kind of old, and when you start pulling them out, you're like, I don't think I can use this anymore. So but the cool thing is that now I get to buy new things to add some excitement to our bedroom and stuff like that. So I'm definitely for like getting rid of the old and bringing in the new to bring more romance and sexy time to your bedroom, to your life with your partner or multiple partners or yourself.
A well-curated toy bag is a important part of a healthy sexual diet.
Yes, out with the old and with the new.
Exactly.
And then in with the new, and then out with the new, and then in with the new.
Yes.
You get it. Well, on that beautiful segue, moving on, let's talk about sex and children. I know that we're going to be getting into some of the particulars, but I guess I really wanted to start by just getting a sense from the two of you on what some of your like guiding philosophies are. I mean, when we're talking to kids about the world, about things that maybe they aren't ready to understand, or really just sensitive topics in general, how are you guiding those conversations? What principles do you keep in mind?
Well, from raising my own children and of other advice that I've given other parents that are kind of going through that, like, how do I start talking to my kids about sex? How do I, start bringing these topics up and stuff like that? I've always had a very, like, don't be hypocritical and have an open door policy, and always cater your conversations to be age appropriate, and also, I believe even at like a young age, like at 4, 5, 6 years old, when your kids are little, like, use proper name for genitals, say penis and vagina,
Yep.
don't shame your kids because young kids do masturbate. So just tell them that, like, that's okay, but you do it in your room. That it's a private part, so you do it in your bedroom, and just having those slow conversations about sex and sexuality and going along the line of where your kids are, and always remind them that, like, you can talk to me about anything, and you can be and not be ashamed to talk to me about your questions and stuff like that. Because if you act like it's shameful, your kids won't talk to you, and then they're finding out sex from their friends, or you know porn sites and stuff, and, like, I love my porn, but I don't want my 13-year-old kid learning about learning about sex from porn sites, and so it's important that you have that open dialogue with kids a lot. So I definitely believe in having that open door policy.
Yeah, so I guess what I heard from you is recognize that kids have some version of their own budding and developing sexuality, and I guess
Absolutely.
recognize and just be aware of that. I also heard you mention, like, let's use the actual terminology for these things, and then to just be willing to talk about the things that come up. Was there anything else that I missed, or anything else that you want to highlight here, Helen?
I do want to, the one more thing I would like to say, like, I know that it's uncomfortable, like, for a lot of parents, because we have a very, like, non-sexual orientation towards our children, and we don't like to, we know what we're like in bed, and it's a really scary thought to think about what your kids are gonna do in bed. And I've done some kinky shit in my life, and I don't want to put those thoughts on my kids, but hate to break it, but your little precious little baby's going to grow up and they're going to fuck. So you better be ready to have those conversations about fucking and safe sex and consent and negotiating, what they're doing in relationships and what's okay and what's not okay and all that type of stuff, because, that's how they'll grow up to be a healthy, sex positive person.
Yeah, and you already highlighted it, but I think it's worth just mentioning again that even young children are in many,
Mm,
many cases having solo sex. And it's
mm,
worth acknowledging that your children have a sexuality all of their own. And I recognize how squeamish this can make all of us grown-ups feel. We don't want to pass that squeamishness on to our children. We want to teach them discretion. We want to teach them appropriateness. But that anxiety, that tension that you may be feeling as we start to have this conversation, that's something I would invite everybody listening to just notice in themselves and to check in on, because that squeamishness, that anxiety, that tension, it's useful and it's something you want to be aware of, but it may not be an emotion that's serving you particularly well. With that out of the way, Laura, tell me, what are some of your just like guiding philosophies, or what comes to your mind in this space?
Like, I kind of really loved everything that Helen said, so I don't wanna, like, exactly repeat it back word for
Sure.
word because it was, like, perfect, but, yeah, I
oh,
think,
thank you.
honestly, every child is different and every, parent's comfort level is different, but in general, I think letting the child be more the guide of the conversation, like, when they're ready to hear the information, they will ask. So if they ask a question, they're more or less ready to hear the answer. And they may not need full details, but like, where do babies come from? If they're like 4 or 5, you can say, well, they come from, a man and a woman have sex and then the woman grows the baby inside them or whatever. Not using words like tummy, but um, like in her uterus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
because the idea of growing a baby in a stomach is a little bit awkward. Um, but like if they're old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to hear an answer that isn't bullshit. And honestly, like when you talk about like porn and stuff like that, or masturbating, it, the more that you're able to talk about it out loud to other people and out loud to yourself, or think about it
Mhm.
without any shame, the easier it is to talk to your kids about it. So I would say make it a non-taboo topic for yourself before making it a topic at all for your kids. Because your awkwardness, I think it was Christy that said it earlier, is going to translate to their awkwardness, and it's going to shut them down or make them feel like it's not an okay subject to talk about. Um,
Yeah, that's a huge notion, and I would encourage. I mean, I would encourage everybody to listen to the Secular Sexuality podcast each and every week. But beyond that, I would encourage really anyone who has kids that feels a little bit uncomfortable around sexuality to be listening to shows like this, to really prioritize getting some of that stuff figured out, not just for your own edification, but so that you're able to model like a healthy relationship with sexuality for your children, and to just be able to talk about these things without having to pass out, without feeling like overwhelmed by the squigginess of it all.
And it's like a thing also too, like, it's okay if you feel a little awkward. It's
Sure.
perfectly fine to feel that way. Like when my oldest told me they started having sex, I was like, Mama needs wine. Like,
the
I need a
opposite.
bottle of wine, then we can talk about it. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a but on the other side, they felt perfectly comfortable coming to me and telling me that they were starting to have sex. So, I was like, okay, this is what I wanted. I wanted them to come to me when things started happening and they wanted to discuss it. So great. But also, like, to get over that little bit of shock, need a glass of wine. So,
Fair to say,
it's
yeah.
it's okay to feel a little bit of anxiety and that anxiousness and stuff. And also tell your child that, you know, this is kind of a difficult conversation. I'm feeling a little awkward, but you know what, you're feeling awkward too, so let's feel awkward together and talk about it. If you acknowledge that those are your emotions, your child's also probably feeling kind of awkward coming to you and having that conversation, so at least they know that, that even despite the awkwardness, besides that it might be a little bit difficult, that you're still willing to have the conversation, and
Hmm.
help guide them and stuff like that.
I like that, and I think that you could also preface it with things like, "It's awkward because I'm your parent and you're the
Yeah.
child, and we haven't had these conversations before." And then to preface it with like, "But sex in and of itself isn't necessarily an awkward topic," and um, kind of delineating why that discomfort is there. That way, you reassure them that, "Hey, what you're thinking or feeling isn't what's awkward. The fact that people have sex isn't what's awkward. It's just the
Mhm.
fact that you're my child, I'm your parent, and it might be a little bit uncomfortable until we've broken that ice." Um,
And I think you can acknowledge that and even bring in a little bit of your common humanity. You don't want to overdo it, but be willing to say, like, look, I had some uncomfortable conversations with my parents who had some uncomfortable conversations with their
it's
parents. And this is just how humans do this. We
like
we
a rite of
pass this
passage.
information. Yeah, you can lean in, I think, a little bit to that rite of passage mentality. But so all that is some good maybe guiding principles or general philosophy. Do you either of you have any like hard and fast rules, like anything very strict that's like, no, we never cross this particular line, or it's always important that we always do this thing in this particular way? Anything like that that you might want to recommend to the folks listening?
I I have one right off the top of my head, and I'm more than happy to be corrected about it. But my big thing is, I will not supply my teenage because I have teenagers and then preteens. I don't have any little kids anymore,
Hmm.
and I will not supply any of my teenagers who are under 18 porn or tell them where to go to find it. But I will
Sure.
also tell them, you are not old enough to determine what is ethical porn and what is unethical porn. So I would prefer you not go look for it. I know I can't stop you behind my back, but I would prefer you not do it, and here's why. But that is a sticking point to me because I don't have any problem with porn. I really support it. I enjoy it myself. But when it comes to children and exposing them to that sort of explicit material, there's that part of me that's like, well, I want to show them how to find the good stuff that's ethical and it's reasonable and it's not quite so like you could kind of curate it a little bit. but there's something about exposing them to that purposefully that I can't wrap my head around. Like I can't bring myself to do it.
No, I think that that's a good line to draw. But the thing that I want to highlight is that you're talking about it.
Mhm.
You know, there is a huge difference between, hey, you're under 18. This is material that is meant for people who are over 18. I recognize that there's nothing that's magically going to happen at the end of your 17th year. But there is a line that we have drawn as a society, and I'm going to uphold that line for these reasons. And you're talking about why and everything else, which is very, very different from the traditional model of porn is bad or porn's not for kids, and you just sort of like block it out and
Exactly.
pretend that it's not happening or doesn't exist. Helen, you already mentioned one of my like hard and fast rules, which is just around vocabulary. You know, making sure that while we want to be age appropriate with our kids, that we're not stigmatizing the body by using, words like hoo-ha and pee-pee and these different things, but are actually like acknowledging our body parts as they are. Is there anything else that you might highlight as like a kind of firm rule that you like to hold on to?
I think I'm trying to think because I don't think I have I'm definitely like with Laura on the porn thing where I'm not gonna like give my kids porn to watch or anything like that. I do acknowledge that I have a teenage son and he's probably already looked at porn. And I'm not surprised, but we do have conversations that because I don't really want him watching it in the house, and I don't really want my kids like having sex in my house and stuff like that. It's just too weird for me, even though I'm very open. But I've had conversations with them about like porn is fantasy. This isn't
Mhm.
how real relationships are, and also like
Right.
some porn can be sexist or borderline violent and stuff like that. So they also have to be careful of like what kind of content they're consuming and stuff like that. And because like all you can do, even if I can remember when I was a kid, like I saw a Playboy magazine at 11 years old. Somebody brought it to school. So I know
Oh
that
yeah,
I
I'm
can't be
I'm
with
confident. Like I remember
yeah.
finding some woods porn back in like maybe first grade. If
Yeah.
if you are part of the secular sexuality Facebook fan group, we had a pretty good detailed conversation about the bizarre phenomena that was finding porn in the woods for people of a certain generation.
Right.
And so
Oh.
yeah, like now this content is definitely getting out there to younger and younger children in a lot of ways. I mean, I have a 13-year-old who has a cell phone that is able to access pornographic images on a scale that I would have never believed was
Right.
possible at his age. I mean, I don't have a problem admitting that I was right around that same age using dial-up internet and waiting
Mhm.
forever
To
for
download
a
the one
picture of
picture.
One,
one boob to
one,
load. Just
one
one
bar at a
boob,
time.
one bar at a time. And so, yeah, there is an awesome power at play here. And I think that we need to be willing to acknowledge that. But before we move on, any other like kind of strict or hard and fast rules that you'd like to highlight?
I don't think so. I think because I'm kind of flexible on a lot of things. Like, and obviously, like I don't do details. Like, I don't want to know the details about their sex life, and I'm not going to tell them details about my sex life. But I think
Sure.
that's just a good general rule. I'm like, if you have that relationship with your kids, okay. I think it's strange, but if you do, I'm not gonna judge.
I mean,
But
I
for me, I don't want to know like, who banged who and what positions you did and all that type of stuff. I don't need to know that. Like, and
Yeah,
I'm not,
Dan
you know,
Savage's philosophy is something along the lines of there are things that a mother has a right not to
not
know.
to know.
Which
exactly.
I
I
like
which I
it.
think is, not a bad philosophy to maintain, that we can recognize that these things aren't wrong, they're not bad, but that they might not be something that you would share with everybody, and everybody may include your mother and father on a particular side of the aisle.
And
Like I always say, know your audience.
Sure.
And I do want to interject that there's nothing particularly wrong about that when you're talking about adults. Like, I do know of adult women who can talk in detail with their mothers about the sex they're having or the people they're seeing or whatever.
Sure.
And there's just that level of openness. And so that level of openness between adult children and their parents, like, good on you. Like, there's no shame in that. But I'm kind of right there with Helen, where it makes me personally uncomfortable if you're talking specifics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, noticing your own boundaries, like
Yeah.
being aware as a parent of what makes you feel uncomfortable, and modeling good behavior by not just like blowing through that discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and like I even told my kids, like, I do want to know if you're sexually active and you're protected, and if you need advice or whatever, I want you to come to me. But what you do with your partners is none of my business.
Mhm. More interested in like the who rather than the how.
Yeah, I want to, and
Yeah.
I want to know them too as people. I want to make sure, like, I mean, they're older now, but I still want to know their partners, make sure that they're kind, good people to my children. That's just a parent instinct,
Mhm.
But as far when they're intimate, I don't need to know details on that. I just want to make sure that they're safe and having safe, fun, consensual, happy sex. If they're having that, then we're okay. So.
Yeah. Well, I've told this story on the show before, but in earnest, basically the only real conversation about the birds and the bees or whatever else that I got from my stepdad began with the phrase, "Hey, son, do you see what those two dogs over there are doing?" And we've talked before on the show about how that model of like sitting your kid down and having like the talk really kind of misses out on something, because this is really meant to be more of an ongoing conversation than like a one-time lecture where you just sort of stressfully send all of this information and then expect your kids to figure it out on their own. How do either of y'all respond to that idea, or how have you been able to make this an ongoing conversation with your kids?
So I do that in a couple different ways, but I'm going to let Helen answer first because she's probably going to cover it in a lot more detail than I will.
Well, I got zero talks growing up. Like,
Sure.
I grew up in a very like Archie Bunker household where the topic of sex wasn't a positive thing to talk about, and I think I was also the only girl and the youngest, so my parents really didn't know how to, like, my mom never had sex before she met my dad, as far as I know, and married him and stuff like that. So we didn't have those, and I grew up very Catholic, so we didn't have those conversations. And I don't know where it happened along my adulthood and parenting journey, but I just started talking to my kids about, because I started to become more sex positive as I got older. So I think I wanted to translate that to my kids. So I think that's where it kind of comes from. But I think that you have to find where your comfort level is, and then as I say, start at the beginning, when they're like, even when they're like starting to understand language, like 1-2 years old, using the right words for genitals and stuff like that, and their body parts, and then gradually adjust the conversation for the maturity level and where they are, and just keep that dialogue open. And then when they ask honest questions, just answer them. And like a great place to do it is like, if there's something you're concerned about, and like I do a lot of conversations in the car because you're not looking directly at each other, so it's not as intimidating. You're you're not like, and then like you can, but you're also in a closed space that nobody can escape.
And it's private.
You got a captive audience.
Yeah, and then like you can broach subjects, and like if you can say like, oh, like if you have a junior age kid, start asking like, is there like, certain people that you're attracted to at school and stuff like that. And, has there, or you can even just ask them, is there an like a rated R movie that you really want to see, that might have nudity or sexual content. And if your child says like, oh, I really want to see this film, and ask them why, why that sounds appealing to them. Like make it just a casual conversation about like sex and sexuality and their own developing sexuality and stuff like that, and also about their gender as they get older as well too. You got to, this isn't just about sex, it's also about their gender and how they develop as people as well.
Yeah, and orientation and the
Yeah.
ways that
Right.
factors into identity. Any other important strategies for how to have these conversations?
Keep your sense of humor.
Sure.
I think that's a really good thing to do, because like I think that like I know that it's worked for me. Like I tend to be jokey anyway, just to ease tension and make people feel better, and they know that it's approachable, and that's worked really well with my children when we have any sort of conversations, including conversations about sex. And that we've kind of developed this sort of rapport that, when we are talking about sex, we'll even like joke about it, in an appropriate way with them, because sex is funny. We're weird creatures and we do weird
Sure.
things, and it's funny, and it's good to have that levity to it too, because then they don't feel like it's so serious.
Right.
Because like, the world is telling them like, if you have sex, you'll die.
It's so
Right.
taboo.
7 billion people on the
Yeah.
It's stressful. It's
You'll catch
stressful.
every
I mean,
STD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, well, and if you are a young woman, you are generally being told that your sexuality is something that everybody around you wants to take from you, and you have to protect it, and you have to protect it. You have to hold on to it really tightly, and everybody's going to try and hurt you.
And it's
if you,
coveted.
yeah,
Like,
and if you're a young man, you are often told that if you're not getting any, if you're not finding it, if you're not making it a priority, if you're not cool and charming and whatever else, that you are insufficient, that you are weak in a lot of ways. And that
yeah.
messaging like really idolizes sexuality and puts it on this pedestal, and we don't understand it. We just know that it's fucking important. And when something is both confusing and important, it starts to become really scary.
And when there's that huge double standard that you were just talking about, where it's different for one gender than another.
Yeah, which creates a combativeness that I
Right.
don't think either men or women, or I should say boys or girls, are looking for. We are indoctrinating them into our gender wars that they did not
Right.
ask to be a part of in many, many, many cases.
Yeah, that's conversations I've had with my kids too, about like men being like the sexual gatekeepers and the pursuer, and the one that is
Sure.
supposed to be like, "Rawr," and women are supposed to be like passive and like, yeah, take me, fine, sweep off my feet, and and like, I don't know what I'm doing, and,
Right.
and all that type of stuff.
Demure. Yeah.
Yeah, and demure, like I'm saving myself for marriage, whatever, or I'm finding the right one, all those messages that they get, which is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
Like we need to have conversation, especially like you also have to know like what personality your children have.
Mhm.
Like if you have a daughter that is outgoing and friendly and likes to be, likes attention and stuff like that, you're gonna have to cater what she develops into as a sexual partner and to reflect her personality. If you have a son that's more of an introvert and doesn't know really how to talk to girls and feels kind of awkward and shy and perfectly happy, like, watching movies and playing video games, but wants to meet girls, how do you help them be okay with who they are, and tell them you will find a partner that is suited for you, despite what your friends and social media and everybody is telling you. You will find someone that's catered to you, and also that it's not a race.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, when you're talking to your kids about these things, do you, we kind of talked about like keeping it conversational and those kinds of things, rather than seeing it as just like a one time only type of conversation.
Right.
But do you find yourself just sort of casually bringing these things up like as you're driving around, or is it more appropriate to actually like set time aside and sit down and be like, hey, we're going to have a conversation? Is it more of like an intentional sit down or more of a like in media res kind of approach?
I think that when you're starting out, there's some things that you're gonna have to bring up. Like you're gonna recognize it. Like if you're in tune with your kids, like and as you're moving along, it's a really good idea to start when you're going to have to start the conversation, so they know that you're comfortable having the conversation, and then always putting that reminder out there. If there's anything you want to talk about, even if it seems dumb or it seems like a silly question, or you're just have some things that you want to talk about, my door's open. But you as the parent has to be the one to initiate the conversations, to start those things off slowly, so they know that they can come to you. And also, and like I said before, acknowledge that this is awkward, and but you love them and you want to have an open dialogue with them, and you're a person that can be trusted, and that no topic is off limits.
Hmm.
And you can even say, like, if they do come with a question that you're not 100% okay answering, or you don't know a lot about, just say, you know what, I can't answer this right now, let me process and I'll get back to you, or I'll find out more information for you. Always acknowledge your feelings and the awkwardness of the conversation, and then this way they know that open dialogue is always going to be there for them to approach you. That's always my go-to advice. Have a sense of humor, be open. You're going to have to initiate conversations, throughout your parenting career with your kids, and just like you would talk to them about friends and bullying, or school, or their hobbies and stuff like that. Just make sex part of the same way you would approach those subjects.
Sure. Well, how do you know when to pick your moment? Or I think I have found the thing I struggle with the most is knowing like when to let up. Like my kid might express some curiosity, and then I'll start to be
You
like,
fire
"Oh,
hose him.
this is an opportunity to give you like some good
All
sex
of it.
positive education." And then next thing I know, like he's starting to blush, his eyes are rolling back into his head. I'm like, "Oh, wait, I should pull back.
Or their
I
eyes
should
glaze
loosen
over
up."
and you've lost them completely.
Yeah, exactly. So what advice do y'all have for picking your moment and for knowing when that moment has maybe passed?
I I don't know if Laura does this, but do you just kind of watch your kid and just try to figure out, like, is this good? Are we okay?
Yeah, it's
And
definitely
then,
like a gauging. It's almost like a temperature gauge, right? Like you
yeah,
Mm,
have to watch their facial expressions and their body language, and like some stuff, like Helen said, really just you need to bring it to their attention and you need to create the time and the space for it. But I would say a lot of it, like the time and the space kind of creates itself. Either they ask a
sure.
question or something happens, or there's a circumstance like they're starting to date somebody or whatever the case may be, where it kind of presents itself. But, I would say keeping them engaged. Like, if you're just lecturing and it's been, like, 2 to 3 minutes and it's just been you talking, I can guarantee you've already lost them, right? So keep your
yeah,
points
don't
short
lecture.
and yeah, let them talk back and forth, ask them questions, check in, "How you feeling?" Um, when I
Yeah,
when I
and I think at least a small piece of it is a willingness to push just maybe 10% past that line when necessary. Choose your battles. Like, don't say everything all at once when you can. But I think from time to time there is a little bit of a need to be like, okay, they're clearly tuning out. I'm just about to lose them, but like Indiana Jones in the hat, like just before that door slams shut, there's one last piece of information I want to make sure to get out there.
And you can always say, like, I've stopped mid-conversation with my kids, not just on sex topics, but on any topic. I'll stop mid-sentence and be like, "Did I lose you? Like, are you gone?"
Sure.
And yeah, and if they're just like, "Yeah, mom, I'm totally blanking out," then I respect that, and I give them the space, and the time to just not talk or think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't barge ahead if I feel like I'm losing my kids, because then it's just like, well, now I'm just talking, I'm listening to myself talk, so and I like to listen to myself talk, but I know all this stuff, so so as soon as so I kind of gauge, like I have pushed certain especially if it's something like I feel is important that I really want to get across to them. I will push that 10%, even 20% sometimes. But I also say, like, okay, I'm like, I said my piece and you're done, I'm done. But, and also you can just, later on, like a couple days later, you're in the car and like, hey, did you think about that conversation we had the other day?
Good point.
And bring it up again, and say, like, did you have any other questions you wanted to ask me? Or like, hey, I know we talked about this, but there was a couple more points I wanted to just get off my chest and let you know, and state them and move on. Just like, again, always have that open door dialogue. Keep it going,
Mm-hmm.
And like what you said with the next day thing, you can always come back and say, like a day or a week or whatever later, say, what did you get out of that? What do you remember from that? Like what stuck out with you? And if they can't recall anything about the conversation or they're not comfortable talking about it, then you know that you kind of have to reapproach some things, maybe a couple more times.
Change
Right.
tactics or try again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're at a good point. Like we've discussed several different aspects of the talking to your kids about sex. And we happen to have a caller on the line, Nady, who he wants some advice for how to make sex talks with kids not quite as weird. So Nady, yeah, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's three of my
Hello.
favorite people. We have
Fantastic.
Christy.
Love it.
Hey guys, so I wanted to share a couple of anecdotes about how I talk to my children about their budding sexuality and human physiology issues, and then maybe a bit of a different an alternative to the attitude that you guys have expressed thus far. But I love this conversation so far.
Yeah, interested to hear it.
Yeah, I'm in.
Okay, so my first anecdote is when my teenage daughter first approached the age that women have their periods. We were in a drugstore, and she asked me for $20, and I was like, "Yeah, sure. What's it for?" And she's, "Well, I won't even ask you for anything ever again," and she storms off and sits in my truck, and I'm like, and so I'm like, okay, I think I know what this is, and went to talk to her, and I'm like, hey, like if you need money for girl stuff, you don't have to, like, this doesn't have to be weird. You can just say it's girl stuff. Like it's part of human physiology. You don't have to be embarrassed.
Nice.
It's not weird for me. It's not weird for you. It was very weird for me, but I was determined to make it not weird for her. So
That's good.
I think as parents, a lot of times the kids take their cues from us. So if we make it clear that this is not going to be weird, even though it is weird, it's kind of a fake it till you make it kind of thing. That opens up the door down the road for them to approach you about other difficult topics. And that's the kind of the way that I went about it. It was like, this doesn't have to be weird. This is normal shit, like you're of an age where you need this stuff. If you need it, just say, hey, I need money for girl stuff. No questions asked. Here you go.
I love it.
Go get it.
Yeah.
I will pick up pads for you. It's not weird for me. It shouldn't be weird for you. It can be. It doesn't have to be like this. And that's the way we kind of combat the traditional the traditional weirdness around the female reproductive process.
All the taboos.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be weird. Like this is stuff that I've been through, right? Like I was with your mother for a long, long time. I know how this stuff works. Doesn't have to be weird. Just ask and we can do it. And that conversation, awkward for me, awkward for her, bore many, many fruits down the line.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
And
I love how. Oh, I was just gonna say, I love
Sorry, go
how
ahead.
you took sort of an innocuous situation and you turned it into an opportunity to break down some barriers. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it worked. It worked really well. Another time, I sat my son down because I'm with a man. We've been together for a long time. Him and my mother still get along great. But I felt that at the age of about 10, it was probably time to confront the fact that, we were in a non-traditional, non-heterosexual relationship. So you guys were talking about when's the time to pick the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the time to pick the time is when you've already been interacting, you've already been having fun, you're already on a roll, and then you're like, hey man, can we talk about this? James and I aren't just friends, right? And he says to me, well, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, like we're a couple, right? And he says to me, yeah, Dad, I know you sleep in the same bed. I'm not stupid.
I love it. I love it.
Like I was expecting this big conversation about the birds and the bees and human sexuality and this, that, and the other thing. And he's just like, well, yeah, like I may be 10, but I'm not stupid. And this is part of my whole approach as a parent is that children aren't stupid. They're just humans with less experience.
Sure.
Yeah, and they're intuitive. Kids will pick up on stuff that we think that we're keeping secret or on the down low, and they see it. They know. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I brought my kids to a gay wedding when they were little. I was like, our friends are getting married, and I think they were 8 and 5 years old at the time. And like, we're going to go to this wedding, and that was it, and that's a really good way to introduce your kids to different sexualities too. You just make it part of the normal human experience,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And one thing that I heard you guys talking about children having sex in your house, and this is something that I struggled with as my daughter, who she's a man eater, and I told her this when she was quite young. I was like, you're going to be a man eater. Men are going to treat you differently because you're attractive, and there's no shame in using that because women have an uphill battle in life. So don't be ashamed. But we had she had a boyfriend, and they were sexually active, and she was asking questions about, like, oh, don't worry, Dad, we'll leave the house. And I said to her, you don't need to do that as long as you're using protection and you guys are good. It doesn't have to be weird. I would rather that you do what humans are going to do, right? Like, teenagers are gonna have sex. It doesn't matter if you ban them from your house; they're gonna find a place to do it. I would rather that you do it in a safe environment, that everybody's cool and everybody's safe, and you can use protection and not have someone barging in. I might
not have it in the shadows where sex starts to become this like sneaky thing that is not well supported, and now all of a sudden, like, your partner selection and your contraceptive use and these different things start to become subject to like the whims of availability. I'd much rather have a kid have sex with, and by kid, I'm certainly talking about somebody who is a teenager and further down the road. I mean, where your child is in their maturation is going to vary. But I would much rather have my child having sex with the right partner at home than the wrong partner because they have parents that are really permissive and they can do it there or whatever else. Now, obviously, there's a lot of ins and outs and complications
you are so
to
wise,
this.
Christy.
Well, I do what I can. I try.
I just remember this caveat. I put this caveat in there too. Like, I have let my kids' partners sleep at my house. So if they had sex in the house and broke the rule, I don't know. So, because like if you get,
Don't ask, don't tell.
take it. If you give a minute, she'll take a mile. So, I just had this thing where I was like, I'm like, I think it was more like I didn't want them having sex and me like coming home and then like walking in on it or something.
Or witnessing it or hearing it.
Yeah, witnessing or hearing it. Yeah.
So what you're talking about is more of a discomfort thing for your own personal exposure versus whether or not you're okay with the concept.
Well,
and
a consideration of boundaries. Just saying like, hey, I don't want to be involved or engaged in y'all's sexuality in that way.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate you taking that position, Nate, and just kind of revisiting that idea because I was very curious about it myself, and I like the place that we've all come to now that we've had a chance to kind of talk it over a little more.
Absolutely. If I could share perhaps one more anecdote about where my approach has led me to with conversations with my kids about sexuality and their partners.
Absolutely.
One more,
please do.
Real quick.
Yeah, please do.
Real quick. And this is a good one. You guys are gonna love this. So my daughter a few months ago said she's like, oh, I asked her how things were going with her boyfriend, and she said, oh, we broke up. And I'm like, hey, what happened? And she said, well, he asked me a question and I answered it and he didn't like the answer and he split up. I'm like, well, what did he ask you? She says, well, I don't know. I'm like, come on, spill the tea, spill that tea. We want to hear it. And so she's like, well, he asked me if he had the biggest dick of any guy that I'd ever been with. And I told him the truth. And I said, no. And he broke up with me. I'm like,
so it sounds like an insecure man right there.
Yeah.
That
sounds like
some
she's
insecurity.
she may be better off without him at this until he grows up a little bit.
So this is what that's kind of what my partner and I said to him. It's like, if that's going to be a deal breaker for him, then maybe he's not the right guy for you. Like, I understand that men have an attachment to the size of their members, and that's fine. But like, if you can tell him that, hey, I'm not with that guy. I'm not attached to him. I'm more concerned with the person that the penis is attached to than the size of it, right? And if he can't get over that, if he can't realize that, hey, like I like you for you, I like you for more than what we do in bed. There is so much more to human relationships than
just all the assumptions about penis size and everything else that goes with that. Yeah.
Right. Are they enjoying their time in bed together or not? That's the only important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's 19, right? So she's young. Her boyfriend's young. So they're still suffering from these misapprehensions about how things actually work in real successful relationships. And so, I said, hey, if he can't get over this, then maybe he's not the right guy for you. And maybe you just need to explain to him that that's not that's not the most important thing. And for most women, in my experience, I'm a man, I can't really speak for that, but that is not the most important thing.
Not by a long shot.
Penis is attached to is much more important. Maybe Laura and Helen can speak to this a bit more, but
I absolutely will. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, I can speak of that too.
Yeah.
Me and Laura can have.
I'll let you guys riff on that. Yeah, I'll let you guys riff on that. But the moral of the story is that she did take that approach with her boyfriend, and they did get back together. And it's become a non-issue with them. So she
may have helped him to grow up a little bit.
Yeah. Good for her for challenging him in that way, pushing him to become an adult.
And good for you for the conversation that you had with her about it.
Grow up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good on you for pointing it out to her that it was a silly thing to break. One, it's silly to break up over that of all things, and two, that she was able to talk to him and say like, "This is dumb. Like, I love you for you, not your dick." So It's just a bonus. It's a bonus like, to you.
Exactly.
You know?
But these are the fruits that having healthy, normal conversations with your kids early on can bear, 6,
Yeah,
5,
absolutely.
7 years later. You can have these conversations and they're not that weird anymore. They're still a little bit weird, but it goes from being awkward to being something you can all just joke about. Like Helen was saying, you can approach it with a sense of humor and, spill that tea. Let us know. Come on, what's going on? It doesn't have to be weird anymore. Your children are going to catch up with you in adulthood. It's going to happen. Adolescence is a short period of the human experience. And if you can make that a little less awkward, the benefits that you are going to reap down the road are unbelievable. So talk to your kids.
Agreed.
Don't make it weird.
Love it.
Fake it till you make it, and you'll be better off for it, guys.
Awesome,
Hey, well
Nate.
said.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much for
much.
calling in. Yeah, I think you contributed some great information to the show. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Nate.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Good night, honey.
All right. Well,
Okay, so we are off to commercial.
yeah, before we get any further, let's take a look at what's been going on around the rest of the Atheist Experience Network. My co-host tonight is the only person I know who watches more hockey than porn. Welcome, Puck.
Well, it's the off season right now, so the ratio is a little bit different.
At that point, I realized I had my first best argument against intelligent design in the human body, because once you start talking about men's testicles, people pay attention.
Step in the right direction. We'll step in the right direction. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, if I can even get the layman terms for a crab and a lobster, let alone anything
Layman
else.
term for crab is a pinchy boy.
Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill. Honor thy father and mother. Boom, boom, boom. Got it all done. And the world is far too complicated for anything like that to ever be possible.
Oh, I know I'm a woman? How do I know I'm a woman? What properties do I have mentally that make me a woman?
A vagina.
Oh, I have a mental vagina? I have a mental vagina, Javier. Can you see my vagina? Do you know if I have a vagina? Stop talking.
Oh, so glad we got that little bonus round from
I
Shannon
love
Q.
Shannon
Yeah,
Q.
that
I
was
was gonna say,
awesome.
way to bring it home. I love it.
Well, as fun as it is to watch her own a transphobe, let's get back to this conversation. If folks are watching this show, I have to believe the vast majority of us would not hesitate at all to support our kids if they were to come out to us. If we had a queer kid, I know that a lot of people listening might be made a little bit anxious about how they would perform maybe and how to maybe stick the landing in that situation. But I have full faith that it's what we would all aspire to be is, accepting and loving in these different ways. But I also know that we put a lot of accidental barriers in the way of allowing our kids to come out, or even making it seem as if coming out is some big process or some big secret that they're keeping until they're ready to share it. What are some of those barriers, or maybe some of the ways of working around them? What comes to mind for y'all?
I know I'm sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. I was just gonna say, so one of the biggest barriers that I would think of that to get around is how you approach them when they talk about other stuff, right? So if you're shutting them down or not supporting them or being critical or teasing them or being sarcastic with other stuff, like whether it's homework or an interest, or something they want to do, then when they come to you with something that's even more sensitive, like their sexuality, even if you've said before, like, hey, whatever your sexuality is, I'll accept you. It's not going to matter if your behavior is unapproachable, right? So it's the other moments, I think, that break down the most barriers. Like, are you a person who in general is approachable by your kids, or do you put up barriers like sarcastic remarks or shutting them down or not listening to them?
No, that's fair to say. I mean, being a good parent turns into being a good parent in a lot of ways. And I
Right.
definitely see that. But I also know that we live in a society where it is really normalized to look at, young boys and joke about their girlfriends or these different
Right.
things. And it's
Mm-hmm.
always gendered in those particular ways. And so that's kind of one that comes to mind for me is oftentimes when my kiddo talks about dating, I will be, pretty mindful to say like whoever you start dating or whoever you
Yes.
want to date
Right.
or, the person that you want to date. And, you don't have to play games or like be perfect with your pronouns here. But I think
Right.
going ahead and introducing the notion that there's nothing strange about a young boy being interested in dating a young boy and vice versa and these different kinds of things. Uh,
I
is
really like
there
that. Yeah. So I had always told my kids, boyfriend or girlfriend, but I like when you say person. Like that's even easier to say. So I would say, yeah, when you bring home like a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And when one of us in the household, because my kids got so used to hearing that kind of talk, that when one of us in the house would say something like, well, if she has a boyfriend or if he gets a girlfriend, the other one would chime in and say, or the opposite sex, right? Or boyfriend,
sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of neat to get that kind of culture going early on. But I like the way you put it, where you just said person, because it's a little like easier on the tongue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have gotten in so many. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an etymologist, but I don't know anything about bugs. But the way that we have gotten habituated in our culture to certain assumptions actually is making things so much harder. Like when I hear people complain about the singular they, I'm like, it's because you just haven't been using it. It's a great tool, guys.
And it's not hard to pick up if you practice it.
It's really not.
Yeah, it's like it's because I have a queer child that's non-binary, and like using the singular they is a transition because I've been saying she for 20 years and now I got
Sure.
to start using this new pronoun. But I use it even in private. I use it when I'm even writing texts. I use it when I'm referring to them because one, it becomes habit. And two, it's that reminder to myself that I honor my child for who they are, not what I want them to be. And I think a lot of what parents worry about, because the way that we grew up, there was a lot of homophobia and transphobia, and it has, and for this generation's kids, don't, most kids don't care. They're very accepting of trans and non-binary, wherever you are in the rainbow, they are more easily accepting, where our
Right.
fear comes from what we saw growing up, where if you were gay, you were like bullied and picked on and heard about hate crimes, which still happen. And I know that they're serious, but for this generation, it's not as big as a deal to them if they've grown up in this, they grew up with this attitude that, yeah, you're gay, whatever. Like my son's best friend is a trans man. Best friends. He does not care. Does not care.
Doesn't
They're
think
best
anything of
friends.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does not, loves him, his best friend. They hang out, play video games, go to Starbucks all the time, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
that's been wonderful for me to see, because I'm just like that's something I hope that I kind of taught them, to just accept people for who they are. But there's always, like, when, like, having a queer child, that there's always that thought in the back of your mind, like, what if they can't get a job? What if they're bullied? What if they're attacked, for being non-binary and stuff like that? Because that fear is there, and it's okay to acknowledge the fear and tell your child that you are scared for them, but you want them to live their life and be happy and fulfilled as a person that they're meant to be. But you still have that, because you love and want to protect them and want them to be okay,
Yeah.
and that's my shit that I have to deal with. That's my
Well,
fear. I'm
and
not going
that
to
fear
put
is
that on.
society, it's not you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
I'm not
I'm
going to put it
scared for
on
you
you.
because of what other people might do or say
Right.
or how they might react to you, but you, who you are, like, you're perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
like I love you for who you are, but and acknowledge it, because if you
Yeah.
don't acknowledge, like, it's the white elephant in the room, like, and if you don't say anything, they're gonna pick up on it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna know that there's something, because they know you, and they've observed you for however long they've been alive, and you're the person closest to them, they're going to notice that you are feeling nervous, and you have to say that, like, this is what I'm worried about. Not you. I'm worried about society and what might come. But I will be here to help you navigate that.
I love that. I remember one time my son, he's 11 now, but I think he was around 9 or 10 at the time, came up to me and he asked, he's like, "Mom, why do some people hate gay people?" And it was a completely foreign idea to him, and it like blew his mind that there's even people out there who are like that. But just having that conversation with him that there are those dangers out there and there are still people out there that will hurt others. It was a great conversation that allowed us to be very, very sex positive and very, very sexuality positive, but also address a very real issue that is still something that we have to deal with.
Yeah, we've talked about it a few times tonight, but I really appreciate the two of you highlighting the idea that the tensions and anxieties and the nervousness and the squeamishness and all of that our kids experience, it's not necessarily innate. It's not necessarily coming from their biology. When it comes to homophobia and transphobia and these different things, they're picking that up from us. They're picking up on our nervousness, our tension, our uncomfortableness. As a therapist, it's especially since I specialize in issues of gender and sexuality, I often will have parents reach out to me about wanting to see their kid who's maybe going through puberty and is starting to ask questions about their gender identity and is starting to wonder, like, oh, maybe I am trans, or maybe I'm this or that. And so often when I sit down to speak with these kids, they're totally chill about it. They're like, yeah, I might be a boy, but I might not be. I don't really know. And I'm like, okay, do you want to talk about it? And they're like, well, we can talk about it if you want, but that's all I really have to say about it. And so often their parents are kind of wringing their hands. And I get it. The idea of having a trans child in 2021 is terribly upsetting, not because of trans children, but because of transphobes and everything that goes into that child's future experience and everything else. But something else that I often hear that I think is valid and at least worth addressing is oftentimes kids, particularly when they're younger, try on different identities, and they can maybe be silly. Maybe they don't give these things like the gravity or the weight that we feel that they should. And oftentimes a young kid will sort of just try on a new gender or try on a new identity without necessarily like committing to it. And I think oftentimes that makes parents feel like they are being perhaps disrespectful to members of the trans community, for instance, or to folks who have really bled for those adjectives and really bled and sacrificed for those labels. As parents, I'm curious what either of y'all would say about the possibility of a 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old just sort of like adopting a new gender identity and then maybe putting it back like a week later, and whether or not that really does come across as disrespectful, or maybe just how much gravity or weight we should be giving these things. What comes to mind for y'all?
I'll let you go first, Helen. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I can understand, like, for people in the LGBTQ plus community that, like, I can understand wanting to be respectful to them, especially since the ones that have come before, so this generation doesn't have to jump through so many damn hoops to get accepted, and we're still working on that. But I think also too that I think that most adults know that sometimes sometimes you want to play around with gender and get an idea of who you are and stuff like that. So I think that no matter where someone is on their journey, that if your kid wants to dress up as the opposite sex for a week, that's fine. If they want to try on different gender roles for a little bit, that's fine, because that's part of the experience. Because when they were younger, they were trying to figure those things out and probably went through similar things where they tried on a gender for a couple weeks and they were like, this fits. Or later on, they were like, you know what, I don't like this, and moved on. Or they were like, oh, I tried on this gender, I feel much more comfortable, and they accepted it, but because of outside pressure, they had to put it away for a little while. So, I think that, I would hope that the LGBT, like trans community, the non-binary community, and that sort of thing, would recognize that sometimes kids need to play around with those gender roles and play around with their presentation and who they are for a little while. And then as they, especially in adolescence, you're trying on all different things anyway, trying to figure out who you are. And then later down the line, if they decide that they are going to stay their gender or transition into another one, or live somewhere betwixt, that's fine, and that's okay too, and just support your child where they are, and also tell them, like, okay, you can play it, and also talk about like some of the consequences that might happen and stuff like that, and say, I will support you no matter what, but just be aware that this might be perceived this way. So, and have honest conversations about that, so and they're not doing it out of mockery. And that's a major thing too, that they're doing it because they are trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah, I would say that the mockery thing is a really, really big piece for me. Is what are their
Which
motivations
is
and their
tricky,
intentions, right?
though,
And
right? Like when
yes, I'd
you're
say
talking to a 14-year-old about, like it's something being serious or important. I don't know that any 14-year-old treats anything like it's important, other than whatever the hell it is that you just did to embarrass them.
And I definitely wouldn't approach it in the sense of like whether or not you're taking it seriously. It would be more, I wouldn't ask them that. I'd be like, "Hey, are you serious right now? Are you being serious? Are you joking?" I would avoid that like the plague.
Yeah,
I
I
think
would
that's
too.
really good
And I
advice. Yeah.
wouldn't, yeah, yeah, and I wouldn't question their motives. But if you're seeing that they're doing it in a mocking way, like say a male who starts dressing like a female but does it in a way that's disrespectful or mocking, that can be addressed, certainly. Like
Sure.
what their behavior is doing and how it's being disrespectful to the trans community and to women and to their own gender, like or to themselves, by making that mockery. But I'm right there with Helen. I think honestly, kids need to be able to explore themselves, and if we decide that there's these arbitrary rules of when or how you can express your sexuality, or how long you have to wait until it's solidified and it's definitely for sure, I know of adults who still, like, I am very gender fluid. I identify as she, her only because it's the most convenient, so I'm not constantly changing my mind, right?
Sure.
But I move in and out of whether or not I feel more feminine or more masculine, more male or more female constantly. So for a teenager, I have to imagine that it's even worse. And to have that sort of flexibility and to give them that freedom and that opportunity to express themselves, I think it should I almost want to say it should be encouraged. Like, hey, yeah, go ahead, try out something new. And if it doesn't fit you and you go back to your old fashion, let's just keep it in the closet in a bag until you know for sure you don't want it anymore. And if you want to go back to it, great. If you're done with it, we'll donate it or whatever. But I think like whether or not it should be offensive to the trans community, I think it should be celebrated. I think if we're trying to make something normal and make it not taboo, then we need to make it normal and not taboo, right?
Yeah, and I guess I'll say that I certainly don't pretend to speak for the trans community or anything grandiose like that, but I don't ever hear that concern coming from queer folks. I don't ever hear
Haven't either.
queer folks getting
I haven't heard it either.
upset about what your 14-year-old is wearing. It's always the straight parents that are kind of anxious, and I appreciate it. If you're listening to this and you have had some of those thoughts or some of these conversations with your kid, I like that you are working to be respectful of a community that you're not a part of. I like that you are teaching your kid to be respectful of a community that they're potentially a part of, or just taking that membership very seriously. But also, this is all play. And especially when we're talking to kids, play is really the only language that we can speak to them in. And so being willing to just try on different identities, try on different hats, try on different clothes in general. I think that needs to be, like you said, Laura, something that we encourage rather than something that we put all of these like barriers and restrictions on.
Well, so then I want to take it like a step further, and maybe ask it as a question, maybe as a statement. I'm not sure, but so you talk about say a teenager who's trying on gender roles, and like say they decide, okay, so I was born a male, but maybe I'm a female. No, 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 I tried it out. I'm actually a male. But where I see a lot of pushback with parents is when kids are much much younger, like toddler or preschool age,
Hmm.
where parents have a hard time if their girl wants to dress like a boy or play with boy toys, or if a boy wants to dress up like a girl. I especially see it with dress up with boys. Like parents feel that tension
I've
of,
seen that
I
too.
don't think I should let my little boy dress up, and I
Yeah.
did. I let him. Like he used to love dressing up, and it has had that I can tell it's had no impact on his sexuality. I'm pretty sure he's a cis het male. Like I don't, and it wouldn't matter to me if he wasn't, but I don't see any difference because I let him dress up. And
Yeah, I
so
mean, certainly allowing him to wear certain clothes is not going to change his identity so much as his like relationship with that identity and his comfort with that identity and
right.
everything else. But I would even go so far, and this is not really my field scholastically, but I would presume that by allowing a 4, 5, 6-year-old boy access to a fairy princess dress and the opportunity to dress up
Yeah.
in those ways, you may more likely be providing the opportunity for him to find some confidence in affirming his gender by
Heck
being able
yeah.
to say, like, nah, I kind of tried that or I played with that. Obviously, we're talking about. When we're talking about a 4-year-old, we're talking about a 4-year-old and how much we should like take that and extrapolate out. Maybe we should hold our horses a little bit. But if
Absolutely.
nothing else, we're fostering an environment where play and curiosity are being encouraged. And I think that that's absolutely vital.
Like you can like wear a girly girl dress as a man, and also like working construction. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both.
Absolutely.
So I don't see like why we're putting arbitrary rules on a 3, 4-year-old. Like if they want, like if you have a little girl, and I can speak as a parent that my daughter was like this when they were little. They wanted to, we got them baby stroller and a doll, and all they wanted to do was race across the house pushing that stroller, just run it, like had no interest in the baby, and was the kid that wanted to be in the dirt and all that
Yep.
type of stuff. And then I have seen boys that want to play in like play house and want to wear dresses and take on like a female role, quote unquote, those gender roles, because they're exploring, they're playing, they're trying. That's part of figuring out your identity and modeling what they see from their parents do, and stuff like that. And if we start putting rules on them that says like girls only do this and boys only do this and stuff like that, one, I think that it teaches that these things are very binary still, and where we now know that they're not. And also
Right.
too, you're putting restrictions on your child. You're telling them like you have to do this thing, and that's not healthy for them. And if you want your child to grow up to respect men, women, wherever somebody identifies as a gender, don't put arbitrary rules on it. And then as they grow up, they'll discover what fits for them and what makes them okay. And then they'll grow up to be a more respectful, loving human being. And that's what we want as parents. We want them to be kind people when they grow up.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like there's the most important thing is how you're treating people. And I want to step in not just as a parent, but also as a child to really like just slam home what Helen was saying. So like me as a girl, as a child, I was a huge tomboy. So I got Barbies and My Little Ponies and stuff as gifts. And I would go and I would play with my brother's Legos and their Star Wars toys and their GI Joes, and I would always be so jealous. And I remember asking for a BMX when I was like 4 or 5, my very first bike. I wanted a
Mhm.
BMX because it's a kick-ass boy's bike and you go on the dirt with it. And I ended up getting a little pink Huffy with like a little pouch on the front. And
Uh,
I was so upset about it that my mom told me that that was the girl version of a BMX and that I needed the girl version because my body was different, right? Like she just
ooh.
did not want to get me a boy's bike. And as much as
Yeah.
I love her and she encouraged me and she allowed me to be all these different things, she still wanted a little girl.
Sure.
And so it was hard, that sort of friction between allowing a girl to really express her boy side. And I will tell you, growing up, all of the girl stuff that I was given and all of the ways that I was encouraged to be more feminine didn't do a damn thing for how I turned
Did it
out.
stick?
I'm still a tomboy and I still
Ugh.
get in the dirt and play
Right.
outside.
Like
Yeah.
when I was growing up, I had a little bit of combination of both because I had like 5 older brothers and I was the only girl. But so I would still get my Barbies and my little ponies, but I would also like play with Legos, and my brothers would take me out like snowmobiling and dirt biking and stuff like that. So I got both.
Kind
I
of
grew up very cis and girly, and I like to wear makeup and do all my girly things and stuff like that. And I do not go outside unless I have to. I've turned into a vampire. Don't go outside. But but it just shows that no matter how you try to fit people into boxes, they're going to grow up who they're going to be.
Yeah.
And so why are you trying to put them in a box? Because
Yeah.
because it's just gonna be more of a struggle for them to break out of it.
Well, and it's not to say also, like, for all those parents out there, like, I do want to take a step back though and reiterate, it's not bad to buy your girly stuff and your boy
No,
boy
it's
stuff.
not.
Sure.
It's really not at all. And it's not even bad to expose them to different things that you think are gender affirming, right? Like buying them dresses or whatever. But at the same time, it's that flexibility. It's that understanding that if they do ask for something more masculine or feminine and they're the opposite sex, that it's okay, like, to let them explore that.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot tonight about how to, I guess, support our own kids and how to, make space for them to be themselves. But I also wanted to at least touch before we wrap up tonight on how we encourage our kids to be accepting of other folks, to be like good and strong allies. Particularly if we have kids that are getting messaging that's not just from us. Right? Like, it's one thing if they are being raised in a tolerant household, but if they are, perhaps visiting grandma who has some very like strong religious beliefs, or if they are hearing things from another parent or something along those lines, how do you encourage your kid to be a good ally without just like throwing other people in their lives under the bus and being like, no, grandma's an idiot. Like, if she's a homophobe, then, fuck her. Don't listen to her. That's not a message that a 10-year-old is ready to hear. So how do we like teach our kids to be good allies in a world that is constantly teaching them otherwise?
I think all you can really do is model.
Mm.
And I think that's the best way to do it. Like your kids are watching you all the time, and they're picking up cues on how to treat other people and stuff like that. And yeah, grandma's a homophobe or a racist or whatever it is. That's just that you can have a conversation with a 10-year-old and just say, we don't say those words in our house. We don't. We always treat people with respect, and that's it. You don't have to go into a long tangent about like grandma's a homophobe, and these are the reasons why and why it's wrong. You just say, we don't use these words in our house. We're gonna be respectful for people for who they are, and then as they get older, and kids hear this stuff anyway. Like, the internet exists, so
Sure.
they're hearing this stuff anyway, and you're gonna have to have conversations with them about like bigoted people, and they know bigoted people exist in their family. Like, if a grandma or grandpa drops a slur, they're gonna hear it. Or even if you don't think they're listening to you and you're bitching about it with your partner about it, they're gonna pick up on that. And so you gotta have that conversation and just be like, we don't talk that way in this house. We're always respectful to people no matter who they are, and just leave it at that. And just say, I hope when you're not with us that you do the same thing, because your words have
Sure.
power, and we don't want to hurt other people.
Yeah, perhaps my proudest moment as a parent came when my teenager recently came home from middle school talking about how rough and tough the older kids were and everything, and how toxic the environment was and how brave he is and all this. And I was like, okay, But my favorite thing was when he mentioned, he was like, well, they use a lot of bad words. And I kind of looked at him and he was like, yeah, swear words and slurs. And the fact that he like understood the distinction there and understood that,
Nice.
I might say, fucking damn and, all of these kinds of words, but that there are other words that I would never utter on this show or any other. And that there's a meaningful distinction, that there's not just like bad words, but there are words that are swears that are only appropriate in, kind of places that are inappropriate. Like, right? Like we only swear because we want to emphasize something
Right.
in a particular way. And that's completely different from the N word or the F word, or these things that we would never repeat. I think that's a important lesson for kids to recognize, because at 10, they know that they're not supposed to be using cuss words or whatever the term might be in your household. And differentiating that from a slur, I think, is a really important thing.
Yeah, in terms of words, we've always taught our kids that it's there are no such thing as bad words, but there's the
Sure.
bad usage of words. And
Yeah.
so there are words out there that only have bad meanings, though, like you mentioned the N word, and I don't even like saying it on air, even in context where it would be appropriate to use it. Like,
Sure.
so those kinds of words, it's not a bad word. It's just that the meaning that has been put behind it and the way that people interpret it, there's no way in which that word can be used appropriately. Whereas other words, like the word or like fuck or shit or anything like that, like you can find an appropriate time to use those words, where expletives do have a psychological impact on us that can help the situation, or they can be used to elucidate things and make things clearer, so there is a time and a place for them, especially an audience. There's an audience for them.
Yeah, a
Um,
particular
Yeah,
audience. I
exactly.
think
Like,
that's
know
an
yeah,
your
important
audience.
consideration. Yeah.
yeah,
Know
yeah,
your
and
audience.
yeah, and in terms of what we were talking about earlier with like how to deal with kids getting information from other people, um, the one thing that I've always done is tried to respect the other person still, but be honest about it. So we
Yeah,
we
that's
we have
tricky
a
line to walk.
yeah, yeah. We have a blended family, so we have my ex and then my son with him and then my husband's ex, and he has 2 kids with them. And so we've had to have a lot of different conversations of, well, your mom thinks this and we don't, or your dad thinks this and we don't. But we do it in a way that's, here's what we believe, here's why we believe it. We don't agree with them, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that we want you to give preference to us over them. You need to
Sure.
reflect on the data that we're giving you and the information that they're giving you, and you need to decide for yourself what it is that you believe. Um, and that would be the same thing with grandparents. Like, well, grandma believes something different than us. And I'm not going to disparage grandma, but here's what we believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, she might tell you that being gay is bad, but we don't believe that being gay is bad. And what do you think? Like, how would you determine whether or not something like that is good or bad?
Yeah, that's a bold stance. I have struggled with where to draw the line, because I have told my kiddo that he is more than welcome to go to church with other family members, to believe what he wants to believe, and these
Yeah.
different things. But I have also drawn a little bit of a line in the sand when it comes to human rights, and
Yeah.
suggested that, like, I don't need you to just do what I say. I don't need you to believe everything that I believe. You're your own person. I respect that. But in this household, like, we believe that love is love. Like, we believe that we're going to treat everybody with dignity. And I don't know, it can be a little bit tricky to say, like, well, everybody has their own values, when those values really cross some lines that cut into bigotry or devaluing other human beings. It's tricky all around.
That is true, and I think that you can attack somebody's belief without attacking the person,
Sure.
or at least not
Yeah.
disparaging them with the child. So, any belief that I would say is harmful to people, like we do have family with bigoted beliefs that I do believe are harmful, and I'm very upfront with my kids about it. Like, one of my family members, I've told them, I said, the reason I don't have a relationship with this family member is X, Y, and Z. Like, you'll respect them, like when you're around them, and you'll treat them the way that you want to be treated, but their beliefs are dangerous, and here's why. And I don't think
Mm.
that's necessarily a bad thing to do. It's when it turns to needless shit talking, or when it turns to trying to get a kid to pick sides,
Right.
with the smaller
Yeah, you
issues,
don't
like
want to do that.
yeah, especially when you talk about like religion, where it's like, oh well, you don't want to believe what grandma believes, she's just wrong. Like, how about teach them how to be critical thinkers and let them, like
Yeah.
what you said,
Some
Christy.
of those beliefs.
I have jokes with my kids. I was like, listen, I'm like, if you become religious when you get older, it's fine. I'll love you anyway, but I'm going to feel like I did something wrong. Like I screwed up along the way if you do. But I would love them regardless. So, that's a joke I tell them all the time when we have conversations about religion. But when it comes to homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, stuff like that, that is a line, that is a stone wall I don't want them to cross. And they're pretty, and it's kind of funny with this generation, especially because they're so, like, my kids are a little bit older, they're 17 and 20. They're way more socially aware than I was at their age, and they call things out before I even know that it exists. They'll go like, they'll talk to me about like an anime or something, and they'll be like, yeah, you can watch it, but it's like really sexist, mom. And they'll just say it,
Or the reverse happens too. Like, my son just came up to me and he's like, did you know that they have these gay characters in World of Warcraft? And he's telling me all about them and he's all excited. So it happens both ways. They're very sensitive to this whole social movement and how we're trying to get everything to be more inclusive. They're very sensitive to that, and they see it both ways.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'm hopeful for the future, because they're not carrying around all this baggage that we had to work through when we were growing up and trying to figure out like what's okay, what's not okay, and like, all these gender roles and pushing those aside, like, well, this is bullshit. I just want, and like trying to find your happiness, trying to find your joy in life, that they're kind of saying like, all the shit that your generation and generations before you are trying to put on us, we don't want that shit. And I think that's very, very encouraging for those of us as parents that want to raise our children to be kind, good people without all the bullshit that we were carrying around, so I think that's why I love seeing that now,
Sure.
to have, as a parent and just as a human being, to see these kids grow up to be better people than we were.
Yeah.
Well, that's certainly
Not
the
me
goal.
personally. I'm wonderful.
Naturally. Well, we're getting a little bit long tonight, so before we wrap up, I really wanted to make sure to take this opportunity to remind people about Sex-Positive Families, a incredible resource with a number of different books and recordings and information about a lot of the topics that we're talking about, and how to raise a sex-positive family, how to talk about secular sexuality with your kids. Are there any other resources or websites that you might send folks towards, or really any other final words that you'd like to leave with the audience tonight?
I think the biggest thing that I would like to point out, that like, as I said in the beginning, yes, these conversations are awkward and they can be uncomfortable, and they can not be your favorite thing to talk about, especially if you've come from religion or purity culture and you don't know how to approach these things. But acknowledge that it's uncomfortable, but you are the best resource and the best person for your kids to talk about sex with.
Mm.
As they grow up, you are the best person. And also, like, if you got some hang-ups, acknowledge your feelings, work through them, and it'll be fine. It will be fine, I promise. And so if you don't want to worry about what your kids are doing and you don't want to be stressed out about it, talk to your kids, educate them, and just tell them to be respectful, kind, and have honest conversations, and you can put them out into the world. And they'll grow up to be good people, I promise.
And I would add to that, like, it is okay to not get everything exactly right or perfect the first time.
Exactly.
Like, they're gonna turn out okay even if you make a few mistakes along the way.
Yeah, you've got the rest of your life to be having these conversations and to keep building on these things. You're not going to eat the whole apple in one bite. So with that, Laura, can you take us out for the night? I know we're starting to get a little long here.
Yeah, so let's go over some links really quick. Helen, before I get into our links, do you have any links that you want to share with the audience?
If you want to reach out to me, I can be found on Twitter at my tag is Hellsbells, but I'm at Helen Media. I'm also on the Facebook at Helen Greene, and I'm also I'm a facilitator at the Atheist Community of Discord, again at Hell's Bells, so I can be reached there if you want to reach out to me. Also, if you or yourself or you know someone that's struggling with doubt and faith, you can also reach out to us at recoveringfromreligion.org or call the helpline, and
Very
we'll get
awesome,
help and support there. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
No,
And also,
absolutely. Thank you for the work y'all continue to do.
Yeah, and if you're having problems talking to your kids about sex and with some purity culture stuff, you can talk about it over there with an agent.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. We do have some other links to throw your guys' way, so listen up here before you take off. If you want to check us out or any of the other content that the ACA puts out, you can catch it at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts, and that's every show that we have. So check that out. You can catch us on Facebook, Secular Sexuality Fan Group. I know a lot of us interact there. And
Absolutely.
lots of great questions, lots of great statements and stories, and lots of good conversations. So
Come tell us your wood porn stories.
Yeah.
Wood porn.
Yeah, and then you can also find us at tiny.cc/ACD Discord, tiny.cc/merch ACA for that merchandise. And I want to do a quick shout out to our crew. So can we get the crew cam up here really quick?
Yeah, most important part of the night.
Yeah, if it weren't for them, there wouldn't be an us. So there's our crew. Hi, everybody. They work far, far harder than we do. So I think we should do some shout outs to
They
them.
certainly
Yeah.
get here before we do and stay here later than we do, which
Yes,
is important to say. Laura, I guess it's just you and I as Helen's computer drops out for the night. Let's just take a moment and encourage everybody watching to go out and give themselves a big old orgasm, or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.